Tēnā tātou katoa I tēnei rā, tēnei te huinga I roto I te ngāhuru, tēnā tātou katoa. Tēnei te mihi kia tātou no ngā pito katoa o te motu, whanganui ātara, tauranga, here taunga o te poti, kaukata. Nō reira no te ao whānui, tēnā tātou naumai haramai ki tēnei o ngā huinga, tēnei te mihi hoki ki tō tātou koniahi I tēnei rā ki a koe Linda Tuhiwai Smith, tēnei te mihi ki a tātou I runga I ngā tuāhuatanga o ngāhuru nau mai haramai ki tēnei kōrero. Ka waiho te mōtiatia, rātou kua pōhiri atu ki te kāinga, haere rā, nō reira tēnā tātou, me tā tātou piringa, I te rangi nei, tēnā tātou katoa. Tēnei te mihi, kia rangi nui e tui honei kia papa tuanuku, e takatoa ki nei. Tuia ko te heringa tangata, tuia ko te heringa o ngā rangi, ki ngā iwi, ki ngā motu, ki ngā moana ki wanganui a tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. My name is Te Rina Warren. I am subbing in today for my friend Veronica Tawhai, who sends her apologies that she could not be here. She is at home, Māwiwi at the moment. So just to put that in, I will do my best to act as an impact player from the sidelines, from the sub benches. My name is Te Rina Warren. I am a uri of Mōkai Pātea, Ngāti Whitikaupika, Ngāti Ohuake, Ngāti Tamakōpiri, Ngāti Hawati. Also, I have whakapapa connections to Maniapoto, to Wharetoa and Rangatahi, coming to you live at the moment from my home in Te Papaioia on the homelands of Rangatahi, tēnei te mihi atu kia koutou. I'm just confirming for everybody that we are in the right place, Te Tiriti-based futures and anti-racism, the conversation with Professor Linda Tuhiwai Smith. So for the 381 participants currently online, this is where you're at. If you're not supposed to be here, you might want to stay around and have a listen anyway. So we're just going to run through a little bit of housekeeping. This is our community code. It's been 10 days together to learn, to share and support each other and to facilitate respectful communication. So these are the code, our tikanga for operating today. If you have any pātai or any kōrero, you can of course note that in the chat. If you would like to ask a question to Linda, you can do so via the Q&A function, which is on the bottom of your screen right there. I will be monitoring that to pass on any relevant, all of the great pātai that will be coming through for our koniahi today. We have a moderator on hand who will facilitate our discussions, and you can also use the chat if you want to share your thoughts and links, etc. Please feel free to do that. Today we are speaking with Fireside Chat with Linda Tuhiwai Smith, and I was given the honour of doing an introduction, but we will be here all day if I start to read off some of her achievements. So what I will do is do a summarised version of an introduction as I reflect on my relationship with Linda, with Koka. She is a mum, she is a nanny, she is an auntie and a Koka, a fire and a darling to a sprightly and okay-witted young man from the Whanganui and Rangitike rivers. Linda Tuhiwai Smith, I'm sure, needs no introduction, outlining her great academic achievements and her amazing community work around the globe. One of her achievements includes the authorship of the book, Decolonising Methodologies, which has revolutionised Indigenous research. And yes, I checked with Ronnie before I used the word. Can I say it revolutionised? She said absolutely. So there you go. The book has revolutionised Indigenous research, and indeed it has changed Indigenous thinking within the academic spaces across the globe for many Indigenous peoples. So it is my honour to introduce her today. She is also, I'm not sure if she realises this, but she's one of the sheroes for our Te Atakura educators, our Te Atakura Society for Conscientisation, because not only has she revolutionised thinking more recently, but she herself has been a tiriti educator since the age of 16. And her involvement with Ngā Tamatoa in leading some critical aspects for the liberation and the freedoms for our people. Which also Tamatoa was engaged with Te Reo Māori Society in advancing the Te Reo Māori petition, which also, again, revolutionised our education system in terms of introducing Te Reo Māori into the education space. But more importantly, as I think many of you will know, her work in the community, grounded in community, and within Māori communities as well, can be reflected in the work that she undertook in establishing Te Kura Kaupapa Maori, or I think then it was called Te Kura Māori, or Hoani Waititi, as a founding member and a founding parent of the kura. And I believe at the time sharing a full-time FTE with her husband while they established it. So working a dual role from the university while they established Hoani Waititi, Kura Kaupapa Maori, our immersion Te Aho Matua based Te Reo Māori schooling. That's a very long way to explain what it is. Also, she is a founding member of the Te Aho Matua teaching philosophy. I believe Professor Yonke still refers to it as the only educational philosophy coming out of Aotearoa today. But for those of you who are not entirely sure about some of the other traits that Kōka Linda has, she's also an artist using cow satire, and I think cartooning or being a cartoonist in that space, and also her wonderfully calm disposition, I believe her daughter tells me, comes from her background in counselling, which we have a few stories about, but we'll leave those for a little bit later, I think. So that, I suppose, wraps up or kind of grounds your base, apart from the great academic work and community work that you've done around the world. Here at home in Aotearoa, we have the benefit or the good fortune to enjoy spaces such as Kura Kaupapa Māori that foster an Indigenous Māori approach to teaching and learning. So ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Kōka Linda. And today's conversation, I guess it is going to be conversation, is leading on from the week's great panels and workshops that have already been held around decolonisation and te tiriti futures. So Kōka Linda, do you have something you would like to add? Otherwise I'll launch in with my first question.
Well, he mihi tuatahi. Tēnā koutou katoa. He uri ahau no Ngāti Pro, no Ngāti Awa, mo tūhaurangi, nō reira aha ko no hea koe, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings everyone, I can't see you all, which I find very discombobulating, but hopefully our conversation will work today. Thank you for joining in on a Sunday. I know that's often a good whānau time, but I look forward to our conversation. I've had a little bit of a heads up of the big questions. I don't guarantee to answer all of them, but let's have a crack at it and, see where it takes us.
So we have a question here. Sorry, no names are coming up on them, but I can see the questions here. What are your aspirations and hopes for the rautaki and the future in Indigenous research?
Well, research is a process, a means to expand, deepen our knowledge, our insights, our, I guess, evidence, if you want to call it that, our mātauranga. So really it's about how do we continue to be a people, if I'm thinking about us as Māori, but how do we continue to grow, to expand our horizons, to feel empowered by the knowledge that's ours and that we create. You know, that's really, you know, why we do research. In itself, it's not an end. It's the processes that we use that we need to think carefully about. And I guess that's what I've been doing in my career, thinking about the language we use, the concepts, the constructs, the methods, the processes, the way we report, the way we use that research to inform our practices, our policies, so that they have a positive contribution to our lives.
And just kind of moving on with that in terms of decolonising, when you talk about decolonising in the research, what is decolonisation in that space?
If I break it down, it's got two key elements. One is dismantling colonial structures. And in the research space, we're really talking about knowledge. We're talking about epistemologies, ontologies, really deep philosophies of knowledge and where they've come from, why they're constructed in particular ways. That brings us also to language. You know, research is very laden with technical language. And, you know, part of, I think, our obligation as researchers is to know where that came from and to understand the history and the implications of drawing on these kind of very deep veins of imperialism, scientific imperialism and colonialism. So that's one part, you know, but the other part is it's not just about dismantling, it's raising up Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous practices. It's reaffirming that, you know, as Indigenous peoples and as Māori, as tangata whenua, we have knowledge, we have our own knowledge, and we have this really important job of revitalising it, of making it thrive and ensuring that the connection between us and our mātauranga and our values, practices, that, you know, that combination is one that helps us flourish.
We have another question, which I think leads into some of that, is what have been the most beautiful and your favourite memories and reflections of journeys that you've undertaken yourself?
Beautiful. I think the journeys we remember are the journeys that move us in some way. And often they're the journeys where you make mistakes, right? And when you make a mistake, you know, you hope no one's there to kind of like shame you out, but that you learn something about that, something about yourself, something about what you know. And I love journeys. I think my life, I was destined to travel. You know, and when I reinterpret our history, I think all Māori are destined to travel. We're big adventurers. And we kind of know that there are two elements to the journey. There's the journey and all that you learn along the way. And then there's the directions that you head and the excitement, you know, about arriving and about what that might mean. I'm not going to pick out particular journeys, but, you know, I remember places, I remember people, I remember smells, I remember kai, And I do remember particular examples that really helped me learn something or gain a new insight into knowledge. I know what it's like to talk, in a distant, far place to people who don't really care about Indigenous people, don't like us, in fact, hate us. I've had those experiences, but I also know what it's like to connect, to be able to use what I've learned and what I think about to connect to people in all sorts of, places and walks of life. So I think all journeys are enriching.
We have a question here from somebody who is on a voluntary board, and they're on a journey to becoming a Te Tiriti partner organisation. But they say that the beginning of their journey and structural racism is live within their organisation. Do you have any recommendations on how they can proceed there?
Well, that's a kind of bare bones of a description, but by starting at the beginning, that's what comes with it, isn't it? Trying to create these different ways of governing, these different ways of implementing Te Tiriti o Waitangi, that it's a learning journey. And actually, it's a learning in multiple directions. It's not just the others have to learn and that the others are racist. I think we also have to learn. We have to learn, what our lines are, what our bottom lines might be, where we can be flexible. Always, I think Paulo Freire tells us really clearly that we end up with this responsibility to educate the colonisers. And it's a terrible responsibility. Why should we have that responsibility? But we can rage against it. But the reality is we have to educate others about how to work with us, how to respect us. We have to teach them that. And we teach them that partly by demanding that they do these things, partly in our own conduct in terms of how we relate to them. And we also have to show patience. That's my life, has been on committees, been trying to do these things. Sometimes you just think you're going, wow, no one's listening. And it is a long journey.
Mm-hmm. I think linked to that, Matt Ritani has put up a question. How can kaimahi working within the Crown affect decolonial change? And how can we most effectively be in pushing decolonial change? What are strategies that we can employ?
I think if you're in Crown agencies, you've got all these amazing opportunities, but I also understand the constraints that you work with. And I think, one of the things at the very least that Māori more broadly expect of our public servants is they don't slam the door in our face. They don't speak for us in terms of reframing what we're trying to say into something we're not trying to say. But I think public officials also have this important role of being able to, they do have to translate much of how Māori express ideas into how it will be heard, how it can be heard, how it can be amplified, how it can be connected to things that are really important. So, one of the most frustrating things I know in my experience working with different government agencies, and right back from the day of both in Ngā Tamatoa, but also trying to establish Kura Kaupapa Maori, is at the very least you want people who listen and who don't turn their backs and who don't slam the door. Because in our experience, often the ones who opened the door for us were not Māori. The Māori ones, for various reasons, and I understand those reasons, were often the ones who just wanted us to go away, and who were the ones who were using terms like they're just radicals. You know, so we were heard by interesting, well-educated public officials. Many of them surprised us who they were, but they were prepared and they didn't feel threatened. And, you know, because we're not interested actually, you know, most political, Māori political movements, they're not interested in the individual, they're interested in the system. So help us access the system.
So linked to that, Ngāroki Cameron has put up a question where she says, someone said that transformation is a journey and not a destination. And can you expand on that in relation to dealing with the government tunnel vision policy?
I think I know the person who said that. Well, it is this ongoing, it's like decolonising, right? Transforming. It's this ongoing process. You know, at a very practical level, if you think about it, in your own situation, your own whānau, you make a change because you want other things to change. So when you make change, it causes intended consequences and unintended consequences. So you then have to move to the next step to enhance the changes you've made and learn where they weren't implemented quite right. And you've also got to mediate or mitigate the unintended changes that also occurred. So you're constantly doing this. And I know Graham Smith, you know, talks about this as that cycle of praxis, which is your action, your theory, your reflection. And that is an ongoing process. You don't think, all right, change legislation, yay. You know, I remember when Kura Kaupapa Maori was included in the Education Amendment Act, we had a big party at Auckland, at the University of Auckland, yay, change it. You know, the very next day, we knew we had so much more work to do and that the legislation opened a door, but in order to implement that, that was just a, you know, a mountain load of other work. So we can't rest. You know, we have to constantly be smart about what we're doing, thinking about what we're doing, trying things. I mean, what I think is wonderful about our people is we just get up and do it. If it doesn't work, you think, damn, okay, let's do this. We don't think, oh my God, let's just fall apart and lie down and give up. We can't do that. So there's constant adapting, learning, changing, reflecting, theorising. You know, all of you working in our community organisations, I know you do that. You do that every day. And the flash word for it is praxis.
Kapuho whānau, praxis. So Leonie Simpson also says, I think linked to this, she says, kia ora te mārei kura. In comparison to the 1970s, how different is the current Māori protest struggle for mana motuhake and rangatiratanga? Is it better or worse? And then she says, kia ora rawa atu nā kūnona Leonie Simpson. Ngā te awa taranaki te whānau apanai.
Kia ora, Leonie. Is it, yeah, I don't think it's better or worse. I think we're in different times. At one, you know, there are points which is like, it's like the 1970s in some ways. It's like, you know, we go around in these big circles where you're sitting in a room, or I'm sitting in a room and I think, oh my God, I feel like I'm back in the 1970s, having to talk about, you know, the tree of Waitangi, te tiriti o Waitangi. Sometimes I'm listening even to our own rangatahi and going, you know, really need to learn about te tiriti o Waitangi. That's to our own people. So there are these recurring themes and recurring practices, but we are in a very different age. You know, the amazing thing with Māori protests is in the 1970s, there were no cell phones, There was no internet. There's like a landline, those things where you had to like dial like that with numbers on them. How do you think we communicated? I mean, the amazing thing is we could mobilize people with very minimal communication tools. Why did that work? Because relationships were strong, because kanohi ki te kanohi really mattered, because we had to move. But also there was a lot of trust in those relationships. And when people said they were committed and they would turn up, they would. So, yeah, the conditions are really different. I think the more important question is one about whether there will always be a need for Māori to resist. And what I would say is yes. I think it's actually a practice of good citizenship. You know, I just think that's what you do, you know, as people in society. You constantly are looking out for the things that matter and are proactive. You know, the days of paternalism where we thought the government, their role was to look after us because we were hopeless and dumb and we needed saving. That's not a tino rangatira tanga or manamotu hake concept. You're right, we always have to exercise agency. We always have to participate. We always have to intervene. We always have to express our views. That's what comes with believing that we have manamotu hake.
We have a participant here who says, so grateful for your work, Dr. Smith. Thank you for being here. New Zealand has been a leader in addressing the marginalisation of Indigenous peoples. When you think of other countries, what do you think they can learn from New Zealand, and how can all countries think more progressively in terms of Indigenous and all well-being?
The reality is Indigenous peoples share knowledge really well. I don't think we in New Zealand are better than a lot of other countries. I think our situation is quite different and our opportunities are different. Māori are a fairly large Indigenous population in terms of our proportion. We're a couple of islands down at the end of the world that you know, other countries don't really care about. And by being an island nation, you kind of have to work things out. You can't just walk to the border and think, oh, I don't like this place, I'm just going to walk somewhere else. You know, if you commit to stay here, you have to problem solve. But I've gone to other places where, you know, clearly they do things differently. There are things that their legislative constraints are different. So, for example, one of the most powerful ones is who gets to say they're Indigenous. And so most countries, you know, in their legislation or in their constitution, they have a definition of who can call themselves Indigenous. And they have categories of Indigenousness, or it's illegal to call yourself Indigenous. You have to go under a different name, like you have to be a tribal identity. So, you know, those histories mean people have to struggle in different ways. And so the things that they struggle for are kind of different from what we had to struggle for and what we've had the opportunity to do.
I think it's Yaron Matras asks, how can decolonising methodology be embraced and adopted by more recent immigrant populations to form a multicultural society?
Thank you. You know, many of our immigrant populations understand colonialism very well. They come from countries that have also been impacted by colonialism. And so, you know, in my experience, just working with some of our other ethnic communities, multicultural societies, and that they understand colonialism, they understand racism. And I think some of the alliances that are occurring between tangata whenua, our Pacific cousins, and our other, ethnic whānau, if you like, that those alliances are really important and really powerful. How do we educate everybody else? I mean, some of you out there, I can see your names. You've been doing this work for decades. You've been doing it for, so long. You know the challenge of trying to educate our fellow people who are living with us, and that's a huge job.
And do you have any advice for young Indigenous people coming into activism in academic spaces?
Just when you decide that you're, whatever it is you decide what you're going to do, you've kind of got to own the responsibility that comes with that. Quite frankly, I think as an academic, you do have a choice. You can cruise. You can pretend that that you're above all of this, that you're just a researcher, you're just a teacher, you just do theory, and you don't get your hands dirty in practice. All right, so some people make that choice, but I like to make my choices on the basis of what kind of person I want to be at the end of my career. What do I want to say I've contributed to? Because in our communities for all this time, people have said, I want to go to university so I can help my people. Well, if that's the aspiration, then that requires us to actually be useful to our people. And a university education on its own does not necessarily make us useful unless we also acquire these other critical tools. The other part of that is we have to love our people. And, sometimes it's like, but it has to come from this deep love that you will never give up on them, that you'll keep trying. And, many of our leaders of the past have done that. One of the things Professor Ranginui Walker used to do is he would defend, he had radio shows or people would interview him. He'd be defending things and everyone else was going, oh my God, why is he defending them? But he had this basic principle, our role as scholars, defend our people.
We have two kind of connected questions actually that come through. So Trent Hohaya says, tēnā koe whaia. Given the digital shift between generations, do you worry those kanohiki to kanohi type relationships that characterise protest movements within your time will suffer as a result?
Kia ora, Trent. No, I think these media, technology, digital platforms, etc., Māori have done really well in being able to indigenize them and make them work for us. It changes the mode of protest and political work. It doesn't change the need to do that work. I think people will find ways. What social media does really well is mobilise, but we've seen around COVID and that, you want people to also be deeply informed in terms of having critical knowledge skills, critical thinking skills to be able to make sense of that world. But no, Māori have been protesting from not that long after the Treaty of Waitangi was signed.
And connected to that, Di Grinnell says, e te mā reikura, ka anō i te mihi. What are your thoughts on current political discourse and racist backlash? What are the ways to conscientise our whānau who might be vulnerable to social media and co-option by right-wing movements? Mauri ora.
Kia ora dai. Yeah, there's a bit of that, eh? But what we need always to do is to expect it. Like, you're not surprised, I'm not surprised. We know the moment Māori start making gains, there's going to be pushback, and we know where it comes from. But, I was just thinking the other day when I listened to, the ACT Party and this kind of constant picking up, going back into, well, I call it as like getting back into a bath of dirty water. They go back to those recurrent themes, and you think, you obviously don't have any other ideas, but to go back to the one thing that you think worked. But I think younger generations are different. I think they are better informed and they are better educated, and they don't like to see people fighting or resisting. They do want to build good relationships. They want to be happy. They want to be able to express joy. And often they see in, these political tensions and sort of weigh out racist actions, those are spoilers. Those are discourses that are divisive and will ruin opportunities for everyone. And I also think that, when our old, racist, tired, male, Pākehā farts, firstly, you don't want the media fanning it, because that's all it is. And secondly, we need to understand we're not to be distracted by it. We need to focus on what it is we're doing, and we need to, be able to strategically turn. There are others who can fight that fight, but I think, we've got more important work to do, and we've got to be really clear about that. Otherwise, we just give them a lot of oxygen.
Kelly Frost says, kia ora, he pātai. As Pākehā, what do you say to us? How can we be in relationship with our colonising ancestors and the white privilege that it affords us, and move into being in relationship with Māori that upholds social justice?
Well, that's a good question. And I think, just the way you've framed it suggests to me you've done some really good thinking about it, because it is about being in relation to our whenua, to our history, to Te Aho Maori, to our colonial past. I mean, we're in relation to that. It's about being good accomplices, good allies. It's about often taking on some of the burdens of struggle that Māori can't take because they're doing other work. So sharing the load, sharing the burden, and being in for the long haul, not the occasional weekend haul, the long, lifelong haul. And I know in the anti-racism movement, and we do have great allies who have spent their lives doing that. But the fact that we know who they are means there's only about 10 of them, or maybe 25. It's not a whole army.
Although we live in hope for the army to come forward. Lizzie Glenharder says, ngā mihi kōka, how do you think the implementation of the new history curriculum should be rolled out? Knowing our kōrero and concerns about teacher readiness.
Totally. That was my first thought. You're asking people who've been trained in systems here in Aotearoa and overseas who have no knowledge. And then you're asking them to carry a curriculum and implement it in classrooms when they themselves not only don't have that content knowledge, but often have attitudes that would make that really difficult for them to grasp. So any major curriculum change in education really needs to be rolled out with professional development, with some really good resources. That's another gap I see, looming, or it's already present. We don't have enough age level, reading level, comprehension level resources in the curriculum that will support this. So it's a lot of work, and I haven't seen the implementation plan, but that's like 2 to 5 years. I'm hopeful. I think it's a good sign, but I'm a teacher by training, and I know what it means to try and implement new curriculum. It's very challenging.
So Matalena, Leo Pepe also asked, can you talk a little bit about changes you've seen in Indigenous research in New Zealand, and what are the key priorities for you in the goal 5 to 10 years out?
Key changes in research methodologies?
In Indigenous research in New Zealand, and what are the key priorities for you?
Well, people are doing it, right? That's the change. People can talk about doing kaupapa Māori methods or Māori research. There's a whole community of professionals who call themselves Māori researchers. Just look at the glorious publications that are being put out there by Māori researchers. So just by existing and by the amazing work that they're doing, that's transformation. And I'll just tell you a little story. When I was at the University of Auckland as a staff member, I had to go and apply for a grant, and that then required me to be interviewed. So my interview was with a very high-level person in the engineering school. It was very pleasant. Offered me a cup of tea, sat down, and he looked at me and he said, "Maoris, do you do research?" And, it was one of those moments where you think, do I teach you? Do I slap you? Do I leave the room? I chose to teach him. I got the grant. He became quite a good ally. It was a really dumb thing that he said, but I know it's in the minds of others who don't blurt that out. So has it changed? Yes, it has, and that's fantastic to see. What else? What other aspirations? Well, I just think we're at the first generation of this work. I want to see what it means in 3 generations' time, where our work, our research can go, our processes, our knowledge. That's really what counts at the end of it. And then the well-being of our people. Does it really make the differences that we want it to make?
I think linked to that, we have another question here that says, my question is about maintaining motivation and morale and really wairoa during those times when you're up against colonial and deeply conservative structures and institutions. I know you're amazing at pushing on through huge barriers and making progress, but that kind of responsibility and perseverance must be hard at a personal level, and it's so impressive to the person asking the question. What can you say to others about how to maintain that kind of hard work when it can be so hard?
Yes, do it. That's kind of what comes with the job. And yep, there are times when you maybe withdraw a little bit. There are times when you are cautious about who you trust. A lot of it is about having a good support system, building community. It's not just belonging to a community. All of us have a responsibility to replenish and build community. So for me as an academic, it's always about mentoring the next generation, growing the next lot of, PhD graduates, looking after my colleagues as best I can, reaching out to them, especially those who are on their own. You know, they're in the department or faculty on their own, and trying to keep them connected. I mean, that was one of the rationales for Ngā Pai o Te Maramatanga, was to join up all the ones, the one Māori here, the one Māori there, the one Māori there, and make us a community. Because if we can be in a community, it gives us support. It means we can share knowledge. It means we can, discuss those things that you need to be able to talk to people and understand.
Hami Hama says that there's a lot of skill and comparison in our young people, and that the current political systems are framed around negativity and blame, and that they're sick and tired of the political schema, but the risk is that they disconnect entirely from the system. What would you say to rangatahi to engage, to encourage them, to motivate them to participate in the system, or is there another way that they can influence systemic change?
Yeah, well, one of the things we always teach in Kaupapa Maori is it's not just about moaning about problems, identifying problems, describing problems, redescribing problems. You know, it can't just be about that. It has to be about solving problems, understanding the systemic underpinnings of problems, understanding where the best solution, can be sort of built, and understanding the power of our own people to solve those problems. So I think that's a more hopeful message. And when I teach young people, I just see so much talent, so much positive potential they have. I think my role now as an educator is to provide them with the tools that they need, but also to have their backs so they can go out there and start solving problems. When we're in a predicament where we think it's the government's fault, they created all the problems, they're to blame, therefore they need to solve all the problems, I think we give away quite a bit of our power. I'm not saying they're not the cause of quite a few problems, but what I'm saying is we have to see ourselves as having the capacity to solve problems. And to have that capacity means we have the intellectual capacity, we have the technical capacity, we have the material capacity, we have the spiritual capacity. You know, we can solve these problems. Our knowledge helps us do that.
Another attendee says, any advice to government officials who struggle with being the representative of the Crown, but are also Māori when engaging with Māori communities? Do you have any tips on how to manage the tensions and feeling like they're serving one side and betraying the other?
At one level, it's no different from if you work in the university. I mean, firstly, you've got to accept who your employer is, you know, who pays the bills, because that's kind of something you've got to be real about in terms of accepting the choices that you've made. And you've got to figure out how then to work in ways that don't put you into these contradictory predicaments where you're not doing the job you're paid to do, and you're not doing a good job out in the community. And then I think once you kind of accept your job, then it's looking at what are the potentials in this work where I can make a positive difference. I mean, you know, when I first started university and I read the regulations, I don't know if any of you have read a regulations book. Yeah, they're terrible. But I always read them with this idea of, okay, where's the gap? You know, how can I get somebody else in here? How can I get them enrolled? So I wouldn't read them just for these are the rules for how, you know, you can or can't do. I would always read them for how can I get around this rule? There must be another rule. And of course, there always is. You know, it's said at the discretion of the dean that was a really good rule. That, you know, part of our role is to really understand these systems and to figure out how to make them work, at the very least. The other thing, you know, the other areas is what I've talked about earlier. Open the door, don't shut the door. Pull Māori through, don't slam a door in their face. Grow them, help them, encourage them to be what they are. And actually, many senior Māori public servants that I met, you know, in my early years, they were really encouraging. They said, yeah, just keep speaking up. You guys need to keep, you know, saying these things because it makes our life easier. Because, you know, otherwise government thinks we're, you know, just making it up. So there are lots of ways I think you've got to learn to work in these spaces that we have to work in.
Do you have any advice for any Māori? We've got a young Māori academic who's finding the space challenging, and they say, do you have any advice for working in the space, especially in instances where you find that it might be Māori who are shutting the door, for example?
That's hard. I mean, I think you've got to find a good landing place, and you've got to actively seek support. And that means going for a walk often to parts of the university that maybe you're not comfortable in. You know, you've got to find allies, and then you've also got to do your work. You know, your best allies are often your students. You know, be good at what you do, be good at research, be good at teaching, because those are the sort of bottom lines that, you know, we've had to build in the university. But I know that you can be good at Māori research, good as a Māori teacher. It doesn't mean to say you have to comply and conform and end up with feeling that you're either an imposter or you're not good, you know, like you lose confidence in your ability. So connect to others, find community. These are all bottom line things. If you look at the literature, bottom line things that you need as a minority scholar or a Māori scholar. Just, you know, work diligently, bit by bit. You don't have to go out and fling yourself out there and put yourself at risk. You just have to do the things deliberately and position yourself really well, get the supports that you need, and then connect with other Māori. There are some amazing Māori academics in our system, and go to conferences where they appear. Join up with Ngā Pai o Te Maramatanga. You know, seek out others. And that's what I mean. Walk, get out of your office, get off your, you know, chair and find them, reach out to them.
So I've just received a message to say we're about to round up, and I'm just trying to scroll through all the questions and pick out a final last one that will sum it all up. But I think I'll just maybe, do you have any final words that you want to say, Korka?
I know a lot of people think this work, you know, whether it's tiriti work or decolonising work, anti-racism work, that it's heavy, right? I don't think it's heavy. What other kind of work can you do? Like, what do you do if you don't do that work every day? If you don't like open your door and think, I'm anti-racist, I'm going to get out there and practice being, you know, this. It doesn't have to be heavy if you embrace it. And it's not negative, it's positive, because to me, it's about doing positive things. So, you know, take heart that this is work worth doing. It is intergenerational work. So, you know, what I think we should all ask is, what is my generation's responsibility in this space? What can we do? And from that, you know, where's the little part that I fit? What can I do? And do you have to be like staunch 24/7? No, some of you got babies to look after. Be, you know, good parents. Some of you are teachers. Be good teachers. because that's all part of it.
Rawe, o tēnā rawa koe ko Linda, te kuniahi o te ahiahi nei. Tēnei te mihi atu ki a koe te uri o Ngāti Parau o ngā te awa tēnei, o te awa tēnei ka mihi atu ki a koe. Hoi anō ki a tātou katoa ko hui nei tēnei ahiahi, tēnā rā tātou katoa ki tēnā whenua me te wai, e rere ki Wainganui a tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. So just want to thank you, ko Linda, for our fireside chat today, and also thanking everybody who has hopped on to the workshop webinar this afternoon and joined us from across the globe, it would seem, as I've noticed in some of the comments on the chats, from all the four winds across Aotearoa, and of course extending across our waterways that join us, that bind us together. Thank you everybody for joining with us today. I'm just going to wait for a few moments till there we go. So just would like to acknowledge all of our partners. There's a whole lot of them on there, so I won't actually read out one in particular, but just want to say thank you for the support. Ko Linda did note to our tech support and our moderator before we hopped on today that this entire week has been a huge production. So just want to thank all of the partners who have enabled all of the kaimahi, all of the workers who have worked tirelessly throughout the week to pull this great series of kōrero together. So thank you to everybody. Kei te mura o te ahi. So of course, as always, I think, and ko Linda did talk about this, we are literally in a marathon for racial justice, always social justice, a never-ending task. But of course, she finds it remembering that it's not hard work. It's the mahi that we do and that we be. And this is just a reminder that in partnership with Pecha Kucha, the final day of Te Tiriti-based Futures and Anti-Racism 2022, there is some type of showdown? I can't, sorry, I've got my thing in the wrong place. Well, that this week has been an epic 12-hour marathon, but I think that there will be another session tomorrow. Oh, there we go at the bottom. 28th of March, 8:30, register at tiritibasedfutures.info to join into the final session, Pecha Kucha. So tēnei te mihi kia tātou, tēnei te mihi kia koutou katoa, kia koe ko Linda, noho ora mai, noho haumaru mai, noho rangi Māori e wairua pai mai, tēnā tātou katoa.